Good evening, Africa Games Week, and good evening, FEJA. My name is Nicholas Hall, and I'm speaking to you from sunny Cape Town. We've got a very interesting panel lined up today about basically the history of the South African games industry, how we've got to where we are, and what we intend on doing. And then we've got some of our most important people and thought leaders from the South African industry to kind of like give their insights on what we've done, what we could do better, and sort of what the plans are for the future. But before I do that, I want to kind of give a very brief overview of what's actually going on in the South African industry and kind of detail the plan of at least what I think we're going to be doing going forward to try and see it grow forward, that hopefully you can get some insight for from developing and growing your own communities. So, a little bit about myself. Hi, my name is Nick. I'm a recovering lawyer. I'm the CEO of Interactive Entertainment South Africa, which is a trade and lobby group for the South African games industry, and we represent South African game developer interests both within our national government, but also internationally. We interact with a lot of the other major trade bodies like the ESA and UKI from the UK, for example. We sat on a panel as part of the World Health Organization's classification on gaming addiction, as an example of kind of the role that we do. I also am part of one of the South African game development studios. I run their business development and finances. We're called Renderheads. I was one of the founding members of Make Games South Africa, which is the largest online community of game developers in South Africa and possibly in sub-Saharan Africa. And lastly, Africa Games Week, the event that is running now currently in Cape Town, although digitally because of COVID, I started that. So yeah, I've been involved in the African game scene for over a decade now, and I've been involved mostly at kind of the strategic level and trying to form it and mold it and kind of get it to grow in interesting ways and really see how it can grow. So I think we need to kind of go back and kind of really express where the South African games industry has come from. We've been making games commercially in South Africa since about 1996. The first commercially released game is generally credited as being Toxic Bunny, which was made by a game studio called Celestial. And since then, we've really kind of gone from strength to strength. During the indie boom of sort of the early 2000s, we really got big success with one of our studios, Free Lives, and QCF Design, with their games Desktop Dungeons and Broforce. QCF Design's Desktop Dungeons won a IGF award for design excellence beating out Minecraft. And Broforce is, as far as I know, the biggest selling African-owned IP to date. It's sold close to now 2 million units, I think. And it is really cemented and the South African games industry as one of the largest and most commercially successful in sub-Saharan Africa. And thankfully, because of the community that we've built, both of those developers and those studios have been giving back into our local communities and have really kind of seen us growing from strength to strength. But that being said, what does the South African games industry actually look like? Well, we don't, very much like the rest of the continent, we don't have any AAA studios. We don't have sort of any major, what I would call medium or large companies. We are, for all intents and purposes, thoroughly indie. We pride ourselves on kind of making experimental and punk games is kind of the term that's often thrown around in our communities. And that's mostly been influenced by the shows and trade events that we've had locally for local developers. But we've definitely reached kind of a hard cap. I think we've grown as far as we can grow with that type of business model. And we haven't seen any kind of like major explosion of new studios or major growth beyond a couple in the last 2 to 3 years. And so one of the things that we're kind of engaging with now is that, well, how do we go beyond this point? How do we go more, not necessarily mainstream, but how do we get our studios to employing more people and making larger production games? And the other part of it is that we've seen the emergence of our services sector. So we've got a number of studios who do services work for either international indies, but also for AAA studios even. And those have found a lot of success. And I think going forward, those are going to be kind of key to growing our industry even more. And it really comes down to, like I said, we've kind of hit this limit where our successful studios are kind of capping out at around 15 people, and there's no real desire to grow them beyond that. We don't have even that many more studios that exceed kind of like the 2-man or 3-man kind of teams. In theory, we have about 52 active game development studios currently in South African game studios, but only really 6 of them, I would say, are commercially viable in that they've been around for longer than 3 years, and they've shown sort of kind of any kind of growth. And one of the key issues that we're trying to target now is that how do we get more people moving beyond that? How do we get people to grow? And the studios that are currently successful, how do we get them to go beyond kind of the 15-man cap that they've kind of hit? Because what the research that we've been doing has shown is that really to get kind of explosive growth in our industry, we need to start seeing large studios. And by that, I mean, we need to see studios that are employing hundreds of people. We need to be working on titles that have millions, tens of millions of dollars in terms of budgets. And currently, we just don't have the capacity to do that. And the reason we want to do that is that what has been shown, if you look at industries such as in Poland or India or even Canada, France is also probably a good example, is a big studio kind of acts as a really good base and allows a lot of smaller studios to kind of mush around them because it gives you a safe pipeline into the industry. People can join these big studios with the comfort that they're going to get a salary, that they're not going to struggle, and they can get the experience and they can start making their networks. And then after 2 to 3 years, they can then move on and start their own studios, and they're in a much better position to kind of establish themselves than what is currently the case in South Africa, where, you know, if you want to get into the games industry, the truth is you have to start your own studio. Very few of the studios are actually hiring, and that obviously leads to a massive failure rate. So it's how do we drive the scale? How do we, you know, get more? The goal that I kind of set myself back in the day was to get 20 studios employing 20 people by 2020. That didn't happen. And it's kind of interesting to kind of look back to see, well, over the 5 years that kind of leading up to that goal was kind of set in 2015, you know, why didn't it happen? And if you kind of speak to the studio owners and sort of and just kind of the general people who decided to start a studio, often these are the 3 most common things that were kind of raised as the reasons or the failure points. The one was that they couldn't get access to funding. So games, as you all know, has this huge problem that it's capital intensive. You need to sink a lot of money at the beginning of your development cycle in order to produce the game, and you're only going to recoup that money maybe 3 years down the line. How do you pay people if you don't have any income generation, if you don't have any cash flow? And often other countries have mechanisms and means of kind of supporting that, in that they have prototype development funds, they have tax incentives. Because I think the big problem is that very few of the South African games actually get published, like they get a publisher. Part of that is linked to the second issue, which is around access, but the publishers often solve that problem. They give you the capital, the cash flow that you need to actually build out your game. But we're even struggling to get to that point. We are struggling, most of our studios are struggling to get a point where they can even pitch to publishers. And the biggest reason is that they don't even have the cash flow for that. The second issue, as I kind of alluded to, is that there's a lack of access. The idea being that there's no major publishers, or at least there hasn't been major publishers on the continent. There's certainly none in South Africa, although we now have Carry First, which is starting to change that, but you know, their scope is limited to just mobile games. And if you look at kind of like where the money is in the games industry, it comes from investors and it comes from publishers, but they're all located in the West. They're in Europe, they're in the Americas. There are some Asian kind of publishers that you can reach out to. And traditionally, we haven't had access to them, because the way that you got access to them was by going to the major trade shows. You needed to go to like GDC, you needed to go to Gamescom. And we suffer, like the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, in that it's incredibly expensive to get to those events. If you can even get there, even if you had the money, there is a chance that you'll be denied a visa and you just can't go. So access was a big thing. We can't get into the global ecosystem to get the cash funds to grow, or to grow further and to actually develop our games and take them forward. And then the other thing that we've seen, which has been cited by quite a few people, is that we don't have the right skills. And sort of the skill curve in South Africa is really interesting, is that we've got a couple of educational institutions who have game design degrees. We've got a really strong animation industry in the country. We've got a strong VFX and film industry. So we've got a lot of graduates and who in theory could be coming into the games industry. And we've got kind of a lot of people with less than 3 years experience. But as soon as you start looking beyond that, there's nearly nobody. Sort of people with 3 to 5 year experience are nearly non-existent. And senior positions, like somebody with more than 5 years, you basically can't find them. And that leads to big issues, because if you do need to scale up your team, where are you going to get these people from? And so, people have kind of hit this hard cap is that they maybe want to grow, they want to employ more people, but they can't because there's no one to hire. And there's a lot of reasons for this. The big thing comes down to, again, is just that there's the security issue. A lot of studios aren't in a position to pay competitive salaries. And because our skills are cross-transferable into traditional IT, we lose a lot of our engineers and our artists and our designers to gambling houses. But also because our animation and VFX industry is so strong, we're also losing people to there. So we've got this nice funnel of people coming into the games industry. We've got hundreds of graduates who've potentially got the skills, but we can't keep them here. And as soon as they kind of start getting any skills, they never stick around. The other big issue is we have a brain drain problem, because people realize that there's a limit to how far they can go in South Africa, especially if they have aspirations of working in AAA, say. And as soon as they could get any kind of experience, they just leave the country. And, that's obviously a big loss to us. I've kind of talked through the rest, and we are running late, so I'm just going to skip through some of the things. The good news is that we're starting to see quite a lot of change in this space. Like, things are definitely, I would say, on the upswing. We've got more business-minded people coming into the industry, more people seeing the viability of games. Some of our longer-running studios are now getting into a position where their cash balances and their books are allowing them to expand and grow, and they're being able to take on new graduates and mentor them and give them a safe space in which order to grow. So we're kind of dealing with all of these issues. And what is fantastic is that our government has now started to take an interest in the local games industry, and now there are serious discussions happening around what support they can give to us. And if we can crack that, that will make a significant difference to our success. So the strategy is, like I said, as I've kind of just rehashed it, we want to get to the new goal now is 25 studios employing 20 people by 2025. So we've got 5 years to kind of really kind of see some accelerated growth. And the big way that we're going to do it, the starting point of all of this is, and I'm a firm believer in this, is that you need to have data. You need to be able to understand what's actually going on and where you are in order to make informed decisions. So the truth is, we don't actually have a strategy. I don't know how we're going to get to our goal, but I'm excited to announce that we've managed to unlock a fairly large amount of funding from a number of partners to undergo a serious and thorough research study into the South African games industry that will not only map out the ecosystem, but also do a gap analysis and finally come out with a strategy document for us that will hopefully give us solid data that we can now make informed decisions on how we're going to go, how we're going to get where we want to go to, but more importantly, where we should even be going. That research project is going to start in January next year, and we're hoping to have our results in May. And closer to the time, we can fully disclose who our funding partners are and what that research is going to be. And I'm very excited about it. And I'm sure we will put it all over the internet and all social media channels, and the results will be generally publicly available. So hopefully this will be an opportunity for people to really see what's going on. And based off that data, we will be able to persuade not only international investors, but also our local government what they can be doing and how effectively they can invest and grow the industry backed by actual research. So that's what we're doing next. We're going to kind of do the research study. Like I said, that's going to start in January next year. And I'm really excited and looking forward to it. And so, yes, the goal is 20 studios, employing 20 people by 2025. And hopefully this time, now that we've kind of got more support and we're more mature, we'll actually be able to achieve it. That's all I have to say today. What we're going to move to now is a panel discussion with some of the key people in the South African industry to kind of reflect on what we've done, where we're going to, how we could have maybe done things better with various different partners and different people. So I'm going to introduce you to them now. Let's see if this button works. There we go. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hi.
I'm going to mute everybody. That's fantastic.
Hey.
I'm going to hand over to Siddiq, who will be moderating this panel. Siddiq, the floor is yours.
Siddiq, you're muted.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Hello.
Thank you.
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's really an honor for me to be here today. This is just a great moment because we have some really important industry players from South Africa. My name is Siddiq Bakayoko. I'm the founder and CEO of Paradise, a company that was created with the idea of entertaining, educating, and empowering young Africans. We're really happy to have this session today because it shows you that it's possible to build bridges. Just before we were talking, we had several conversations with business professionals and other people in the industry globally. We're talking about how to build bridges between the Western world and Africa. And here we see that it is possible to have collaborations and things that we do together within the continent as well. The idea, as Nick said today, is really to deep dive into the South African market, look at what happened in the past, what's the state today, and how is it going to evolve, with the idea that this can help give, in a sense, to other countries within the African continent, a perspective on how they did it. Because when you look at the South African market in very many different ways, people look at it as a very advanced market compared to others. So we hope you will enjoy it. So let's start. Let me start with, I'll start with Site. Site, please introduce yourselves and tell us, how many hats you have today.
Hi, I'm not going to say all my hats, but yeah, hi. So I'm Site Ngube. I'm originally from Zambia, but I'm currently in South Africa. Most of the hats I wear involve community organization within the games industry. So it kind of started in Zambia when I started with trying to group together our own games enthusiasts, game development enthusiasts, because at the time we didn't really have developers. And all that moved up to things like being a regional organizer for Global Game Jam. I've worked with some festivals like Amaze. And right now, I guess my most interesting role, and I think something which would be very impactful to the African game developers, it was my role as an advisor for Humble Games Black Game Developer Fund. So yeah, that's me.
Wow, incredible. Limpo, please tell us more about yourself.
Hello, my name is Dimpo Moeti. I am the business developer. Excuse me. I don't have COVID. I've got a kidney. I'm the producer and business developer for an indie studio here called Nyamakop. We're making African-inspired games. Darn it, sorry. For a global audience. And I previously worked at Free Lives, who made Broforce and Born and Genital Jousting. I was the deputy festival director for Playtopia for about 2 years, for the first 2 years. Now I'm at Playtopia. I do a lot of talks, and I generally have an interest in both how do we grow the industry and how do we create a studio that reflects the values and the experiences of the continent while still making very cool, enjoyable games that everyone can play. That's me.
Nice, thank you. Luke, please tell us more about yourself. You're one of the pioneers.
Hello, my name is Luke, and I run 24-Bit Games out of Johannesburg. We're a technical game development studio that specializes in engineering, co-development, and porting games for various publishers and developers, mostly overseas. I'm originally Canadian, not South African. And I've been in South Africa for, 20 years now, a little bit more than 20 years now. So I've kind of been around to see all stages of the South African industry growth that Nick touched on in his initial presentation. So I've kind of been around, seen it all. Been a part of 3 separate development studio startups. So I've been able to fail a few times and hopefully learn from those mistakes and apply that knowledge going forward and see what we can do to help the local industry grow.
Nice. Let's stay on you. Can you tell us more? Let's say if we had to go back a few years and you had to, we're back in your shoes very early on when you were just starting. How was the environment at that point? How were the other studios? Were there other studios in South Africa? How was the government support? How was the support from other entities? How was it? Please tell us.
Non-existent. So when I first got involved in game development in South Africa, it was 1999, and it was a venture capital funded game development studio. There was initially it was myself, a South African, and 5 or 6 Americans who founded this, and within a year, all the Americans left, and there was just me remaining, and we replaced them with South Africans. So we were able to kind of fill up the studio with South Africans relatively quickly within a few years. And yeah, it's at that time there was Celestial / Twilight was the only other studio around at that time that we were all aware of, developing PC games. We were working on console games at that time, and yeah, that's all there really was. There was some local forums talking about games and game development for hobbyists, and that's really kind of that's the real start of the whole local South African game dev ecosystem. And there's really never been that I've been exposed to any sort of effective government support funding. It's only ever been from private ventures, either from investment equity coming in, which is very, very limited. I've only seen it a couple of times, and mostly it's just been self-funded startups.
Wow, nice. Limpo, tell me a little bit. You at Nyamakov, you guys are working on different games.
Yeah.
I heard about some of your games, especially one that was published, on Nintendo Switch. Tell us, when you look and you have to compare what you guys are going through now, the kind of platforms that you're using today, if you had to compare it a little bit with some of the things that were done before, 10, 15 years ago, when you look at some of the studios that exist before you, what are some of the main differences that you see? What could have been done better?
So I think it's a very tricky question for me to answer, because I feel like a lot of what we've been able to do now has been through just experience. I think what became a very interesting thing for me is seeing the makeup of studios. Like, in general, who tends to be involved with game development? Are they representative of the country? And like, for all intents and purposes, the answer is generally no. It's not representative. It's predominantly white guys, an alarming amount of white men named Ben. And so I think what we started to do is we started to ask the question, how do we create the kind of studio that we want to see? How do we create a studio that has predominantly Black African talent? What kind of tools do we need necessary to really upskill and level up very talented individuals from games adjacent industries, whether that's film or animation or computer programming? Like, how do we bring in these people into the industry and create a sustainable model where they're getting the skills specific to games necessary, where it's a long enough term that we're not putting people's livelihoods at risk? And I think that's not something I see a lot with a chunk of the studios here. I think it's usually the assumption that you need to be good at what you do already to be involved with a lot of industries. So it's been noticing like the different kinds of managerial styles. How do you take young, talented people in and grow them? what's the best way to grow them in such a way that they remain in the industry, even if they eventually leave your company. And asking about and thinking about the long-term future, not just for our studio, because obviously our long-term goal is to make a great game, make all the money, move to Korea, marry someone in the K-pop industry. Okay, wait, no, those might just be my goals. But like the goal is just like make a ton of money. But then the question becomes, assuming we do make a ton of money, how do we use that money not only to further ourselves, but to further the industry as a whole? How do we support the people we work with and ensure that they have the ability to become seniors? How do we ensure that they have the ability to open their own studios? Looking at like what kind of deficits are there in the industry that we need to be able to have more studios survive for longer terms, or just make prototypes. So that's really what I've noticed in the big differences. It's just also in terms of like, what is it you're trying to do with your studio? How is it you're trying to keep people in the industry? And how are you trying to train people? And what's the best practices for that?
Thank you very much. Nick, let's I mean, you have a broader perspective because you see and you deal with with a lot of the studios that are based in South Africa. What's your take on what you think has worked all these years, and what are some of the key things that you think are specific to the South African market in terms of what makes it work?
Okay, so I mean, I think if we want to look specifically at the business model, I think the one thing that significantly differentiates the perspective of South African developers from the rest of the subcontinent, or sub-Saharan Africa at least, is the focus on which market we try to approach. And I think there's a bunch of factors to this, but South African developers have, for the most part, basically taken the position that Africa isn't a viable consumer market yet. And so they don't try to make games for the African market specifically. They're kind of like, we're going to go and we want to get our consumers from France. We want to get them from Europe, the United States, China, because that's where the money is, and that's how we will get paid. And so, there's been very deliberate efforts to kind of say as well, can we make internationally appealing games? And if you look at our commercial successes, that's certainly held true. All of the big games that have been a success in South Africa aren't particularly African. I think that's the one thing. That's not to say, I think, which is why I'm excited about what Nyamakop is doing, is I think the real money, the real success is going to is making African games that have an international appeal. I think once we do that, like, the floodgates will open. We'll see massive success. But it speaks to the diversity problem that we've currently got in South African industries, is that because we are not representative, it's very difficult for us to make authentic African games. And you kind of see it in like, there are a couple of studios who will make an African game, but it's very much a white South African lens. And that's just like, it doesn't have the international appeal. The second thing that I think we have done well as well, that I'm not really seeing in the other African markets, is that we've really pursued the services sector for the international market. 24-bit games, there's Ballisti Games in Cape Town as well, and there's a couple of others who have really kind of said, well, look, it's difficult making money out of games. It's a hell of a difficult making it using your own money. So let's make money spending other people's money. And South Africa is fortunate in that we've got a very developed education system that is spitting out graduates for all the channels, art, programming. So we've actually got a really good mix to make really successful services sector. We have a fairly neutral English accent, which means, and we're on the same time zone as Europe. So there's a lot of things that play in our favor for the services sector. So that's something else that we've done really well. But the caveat there being is that I think there's learnings that we need to take from our local film industry, which has also built itself heavily on the services sector. And they're kind of struggling now to kind of get out of that. You know, that's kind of like, it's been so focused on just doing services that it's almost been neglected kind of the own IP creation. And really, that's what we need. We can't purely be services based. We need to also have our own IP generation. And we need to use the services sector to kind of drive the growth. But then while we're doing that, we need to be making sure that our own independent creators are also getting the necessary support.
Yeah, it's the fine balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Fine balance. I mean, what you said was really interesting, and I would like to go back to Sita now. Since working on the Global Game Jam, you've had a perspective. You've had to deal with different ecosystems, video game ecosystems throughout the continent. What's your take on some of the main differences? Do you feel the rest of the continent is ready? What are some of the main elements that you see, and what are some of the main drivers for the future and for the growth of this industry?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I have, like, besides working with Global Game Jam, I do have like just a general interest in the African games ecosystem in various countries because where I'm from in Zambia, like I said, at the time I was starting a community, like, in fact, even up to now, like, our games industry is pretty non-existent. So, I do look at other places and see what's going on there. Before I fully answer your question, I just wanted to go back to something Nick said, where he hit the nail on the head with the when he's talked about, like, how South African developers make games that appeal to a more West audience. They basically don't consider the local industry or local consumers as a viable market. And something interesting about that is, I think, Nigeria, you can see Nigeria as a complete contrast to that, because I think, like, if you look at the Nigerian games industry, you'll see that it's heavily built on local consumers and consumers in the diaspora. Like, most of the people who play Nigerian games are Nigerians themselves. They make games that appeal to the local market. They use smartphones. It's actually a very interesting contrast, and I think it's something, like, if you're ever looking at, I guess, the differences in game development across the continent, it's a case study which I think people should definitely look at. I guess, like, the South African and Nigerian games industry, and how they work. Like, it's a very important thing to look at. Yeah, and going back to, oh my gosh, I think I just forgot your actual question. Please repeat it for me.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's great. What you gave is definitely a great insight into, and I think my question was to kind of like rely on your experience dealing with other studios. And one of the things you said is definitely a major point. And I also wanted you to emphasize on what are some of the main differences and the drivers for the growth of this industry.
Right. Oh, the drivers for the industry. I think a lot of people have started, so Africa is a young continent. Like, there are a lot of young people on the continent, and I think for the longest time, like, people have been interested in games, and there is, like, for a lot of people, it is an aspirational, like, well, let me just say, a majority of developers on the continent, like, or people who are interested in game development, have, like, an aspiration to maybe, like, create the games that I played before, some things like that. They have a lot of idyllic aspirations, but, like, there isn't, in a lot of places, there isn't any infrastructure or pipeline that can actually support people to get into those industries. Definitely the interest for game development I've seen among Africans is from a lot of young people. So there is, like, there is a big young population that has interest and can definitely learn the skills, can definitely learn the skills, but, like, there aren't the resources around them to do that. Most places you wouldn't be able to find game development education, game development, like, safe in entry level industry positions, like South Africa has that problem, so you can imagine like how that is like in other places, because South Africa, I guess, a lot of people do consider like South Africa like has like a much better infrastructure for people to get into game development, even though like here, like we did talk about the problem. So everything that is a problem here, like it's a it's or a lot of things that are a problem here, like it's compounded much bigger in other African countries. Um, yeah, so that is a major problem. And you can also, I guess, if you look at things like the tech industry, that's the closest industry. I guess that's the closest um, adjacent skills industry that you can have people get into games all around Africa. People do still struggle with actually pipelines into tech jobs as software developers. There are a lot of talented software developers on the continent, but there is a problem in like building people's skills to a competitive level, and also just supporting people in general with careers and opportunities in that. There are a bunch of case studies around that. I think most recently you can kind of look at what happened to Andela. If you're familiar with that, if you can just look at what happened to Andela. Andela was like very it it did have like it was a pretty big, a lot of people saw it as a really big hope, or not even a hope, like it just seemed like something solid to get a lot of African developers, sub-Saharan African developers particularly, into jobs, into tech jobs, competitive tech jobs, like from people in the West. But ultimately, they ended up what's the word? I don't know the word, but retrenching, scrapping. But a lot of people, because they weren't able to build up this skills to a competitive level. I think so. In summary, I think there's a lot of work to be done, and not enough resources to be put into that. Like it's all over the continent. Like this stuff, games is yeah, you need money. Like I think Nick did say earlier, like it says capital intensive. It's not something which like you can just which you can build people's skills in any basic secondary school or college. You really need to invest in the right tools and technology. Yeah, so that is the biggest problem all over the continent. Oh, I think I said a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for sharing that. I think, some of the people that are listening to us today may not know the African market, so to say, and some do know and understand the market, but don't necessarily see the big differences between the South African market and some of the other ones. So I think your perspective, what you have to say was great. Look, you are what I would call a veteran, because 1999 to now, you went through several battles, and you're still standing. So I think I would want you to share more on one of the things that I heard here was resources, having key resources and people that are trained well. Where do you think your company is standing today in terms of human resources, and what are you trying to do now to develop it?
Great question. It's a constant battle. It's a tricky thing, because we want, obviously, there to be resources available and at hand for when we need them, and when you need to grow and upskill, or new projects come into play, and we need to be able to handle those projects. But those kind of growth humps aren't always happening. They come and they go, and there's not really enough studios in South Africa to kind of have a constant amount of growth. It's very kind of few and far between when that growth is necessary. So I think, like basically everyone else on the panel has alluded to, there's a lot of drain talent-wise when it comes to game devs in South Africa, in adjacent industries. Other IT tech houses, they're always looking, they're always hiring, maybe because they churn through people more than they should be. Who knows? But they're always looking for people, and they can pay, generally speaking, a lot more or a lot better salaries than local game dev can. That's something that has been changing. I've seen it with us at 24-Bit Games and with other local studios. But when you have big giant IT houses and banks paying the salary bills, there's just more money in those industries. Our industry doesn't have that kind of capital. And like Sita has just said, it's all about money. You need to have money coming in that's going to increase the ability to hire and to train. And training as well is just it's a very time consuming process, and which ultimately costs money, because that means that your seniors, your intermediates, they can't be put onto more taking on large tasks, or can't be contributing to projects that you're ultimately going to get money from, whether it's your own game or whether it's helping someone else build their game. And because they're going to be busy training up and upskilling other people. And then as those people start to develop skills, they start working on projects. They're obviously not going to be, they're not expected to be, and nor should they be as effective as more senior people. So then it's going to still require more seniors' time to, spend more time doing code reviews and fixing issues that maybe have come in along the way with less skilled individuals. So it's a constant. It's a challenge, but it's not something that we haven't been able to overcome. I guess it's a good time for you to ask that question, because we've actually just hired 3 people that started in November, and we've got 3 new members starting in January as well. So we've been able to hire 6 people in the last few months, and it was many interviews over many days to kind of narrow that field down. And there's so many great people that we were interviewed that just didn't fit what we do as a job. We're very technically focused as we have 70, I think it's about 75+% of the people who work for us are engineers, and very technical engineers. So they need to be able to do solve difficult problems. And it's not kind of what what traditional game development maybe is, excuse me, for just making games. If you're an indie studio and you're making games, you need different skill sets. You need some of what we do, but you need a lot more. You need a lot more game design kind of level of skills, and that's not what we hire for. So there really are great new juniors coming out of the whether they're self-taught or out of the local learning institutions. But there isn't a place for them to go all the time when they graduate, and that's something that's we need methods of retention, and I think a lot of it goes to what Nick covered. I think you pretty much covered everything that I was going to probably say it all here when in this long introduction. But yeah, if there's more money coming in, then that can create jobs that are actual industry type jobs. While having small indie studios is fantastic and great, it's really what kickstarted any level of industry in South Africa. We need people to be able to have the confidence and the safety of just jobs that they know they're going to get a paycheck every month in, and just for their own peace of mind, and then that's how they're going to grow and that's how they're going to develop. The current landscape of game dev in South Africa, for the most part, is very kind of fractured and very it's not safe in a lot of ways. So it's difficult to pick that as a career unless you're a young person with no financial ties and stuff. You can take risks on that, but if you want to start a family, you want to buy a house and move on in your life, it's not for the faint of heart to get into to pick game dev as a career in an emerging industry like we are here. So yeah, I think once we can start being able to hire in a way where we can have the money to devote proper training, onboarding, skills growth in the industry, then that's gonna give us a much better foundation going forward.
Good.
If I can
jump in on that.
Yeah, me too.
Ladies first.
Okay, so I agree 100% with everything Luke said. I think it's incredibly valuable. I think what's really interesting for me is just getting people to the point where they can like consistently pitch games, just like getting people the opportunity to like build their studios outward in that way is such a big part of the struggle as well. That, you know, game design is not for the faint of heart, but I mean, it's disheartening to know the amount of talented developers we have in this country who just can't even get to the point of speaking to publishers. And the great thing with like events like African Games Week, like Global Game Jam, like Playtopia, like Amaze Johannesburg, when it used to happen, is it does showcase a lot of the cool stuff we can do and slowly brings in more and more publishers. But at the point where we don't have that immediate, that beginner's base of just being able to give money, give people the capital they need to really grow sustainably, it's quite a struggle and a little bit frustrating. Please ignore the cat. But yeah, like I think that was a big thing for me to add. Nick, what were you going to say?
So I think what Luke he hit the nail on the head is that there is a structural problem with games in terms of not only how we make our money, but like the skills required to do it. And essentially our costs are salaries, right? That is our biggest cost. I know at Renderheads it makes up like it is our largest cost by far. And it's salaries and then tax. And then after that, software license fees. And the thing is, because our margins are so low, right? And like we primarily operate in the services industry, which is similar to Luke. We can't afford to have dead weight. So it's very good to talk about, oh, yes, studios need to be proactive about training and stuff, but you can't actually afford, or at least most studios can't afford to have non-productive members on your team. And so part of it, one of the incentives that I would like to see is how, you know, the studios need to be supported in that way. So, I mean, we've got an internship program at Renderheads, which has been really successful. But I mean, out of our studio of 15, we can afford to take one intern every 6 months, right? So, like, you know, it's just not enough. You know, and part of it comes down to is that, you know, if we want to get the diversity that we want, and sort of Renderheads sees its role in doing that, is we know that we have to be able to pay these people. We can't do free internships, right? Because also we need to be with them. They need to be with us long enough. And I think this is the thing is that in other industries, this is why a big studio is so important, is because if you look at somebody like France, or if you look at Canada and the United States, like they have AAA there. Like they're so large and their budgets are so big, they can afford to have dead weight, right? It's a really, as much as we kind of deplore labor standards and kind of what goes on in the AAA industry, it actually serves a really vital role because it gives people a place to kind of go where they don't have to be effective from day one, right? They can afford to learn in those studios. But with smaller industries, like because you're so fragile and your margins are so lean and you're constantly on this treadmill, you can't afford to have that dead weight. And I think that's the real struggle that our local studios have been facing is that there's a lot of desire from a lot of the teams to be more diverse and to kind of take interns and kind of upskill people. But they literally can't afford it. You know, so how do we do that? And yeah, tell me, Dimple, how do we do it?
Look, okay. So I do think that that's a really fair point, and I think it's very important. But I think that with my experience with Nyamakop, the second thing I noticed is that, especially in junior positions, there is a level of ability that you already need to have, right, to get a junior position in a studio in general. And then from there, it's just about gaining experience, working with a team, and learning as you go. And I think part of the problem is that we've created an industry that doesn't feel particularly inclusive or particularly open to a lot of diversity. So, I mean, you end up with a bunch of really talented people who could be doing awesome things and learning from the get-go and being productive from the get-go, not necessarily applying or even knowing that there are these openings. So I think that like there's it's not necessarily that someone you're onboarding is definitely going to be unproductive. I mean, with our onboarding process, we found that like from the get-go, people were productive, and it was just about steering them in the right directions and just being to a degree hands-on in terms of helping them get through roadblocks or things they didn't understand. And that was like a 3-month process, and then most of them just took off. Some of them didn't even need that much time to get better. But I think it's about making that conscious, active decision to find people who want to be in the industry, who have the skills, so that onboarding process isn't a long time and isn't a drain. And I think that there's a degree where if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, you're less likely to be, I think, conscious. It's not a conscious thing. I think there's a subconscious degree where you may not be seen as safe a bet as a white person or a guy, because that's kind of how our society, particularly in South Africa, has always functioned. So I think that on the one hand, it is needing more funding and more initiatives and support for initiatives to gain people, to give people skills so that more studios can do internships. But I think on a second level, it's also about being conscious of possible biases and also headhunting. I mean, I'm working at a studio of like 8 people, and 6 of us are people of color. So it's not impossible, it's 100% doable. And the talent is there. It's just about actively looking for them, actively reaching out. And I think that that's not something we do very well in our industry yet.
Okay. And guys, I think, for everybody that's listening in, please make sure if you have any questions, please make sure you send them to us, and on the panel we'll be happy to answer those. I think we've talked, about some of the main gaps. We talked about the financial aspect. We talked about the human resources aspect. And I think I want us to touch on a topic that's important as well, is the future. We've looked at where you guys are coming from and where you're standing, but let's say, maybe we can start with Luke. If you look 10 years, in 10 years or 15 years, where do you think the gaming industry would be in South Africa? And what are some of the things you think we need to start doing now?
Oh, yeah. Who knows? Yeah, it's a loaded question. I think there's nothing we can do but grow. I think we've kind of have a very solid base where we are now. That base itself isn't primed for growth, but I think that's the only thing that really can happen is to go forward. And I'm gonna just sound like a broken record, but from my point of view, we kind of had that indie boom. I think probably facilitated 10 years ago by stuff like Unity, Unreal becoming very accessible, with better internet infrastructure in South Africa, with access to stores like Steam and mobile app stores becoming very readily available and easy to self-publish, and that's kind of what's got us here where we are now. Just to again repeat what Nick said, is that we need an additional business model in South Africa, and that's what's going to get us the growth. So in 10 years, what I would like to see is I would like to see multiple larger international developers or publishers having studios in South Africa, employing between 25 and 50 plus people each, which will give us the ability to be training new developers entering the industry, being able to give them the skills that they need to succeed at their job, and then to at some point go off and develop their own companies, their own studios, and making their own games. That's what I want to see. I've been wanting that for a little while now. I've felt that we've kind of hit the cap and we've kind of plateaued at the current kind of rate of growth. There haven't really been any new studios growing in South Africa for a few years now. So yeah, from what I would like to see is that be able to have 100+ game dev jobs across all the different fields: art, production, game design, programming, audio, employed locally with enough infrastructure and funds to be able to make sure those are secure jobs and give people who are, kids in high school saying, wow, I can go work at these companies in South Africa. I don't need to move to America or to Europe to go work at this developer who makes my favorite game. I can do this locally. It's something that I can reach for. And what do I need to study? I need to study this, that, and the other in high school. And then how do I take that further? Okay, I can study these courses at university, and then I can actually get a job locally doing what I want to do as a career, not just as a hobby that maybe pays money or maybe doesn't.
Okay. Well, thank you. Site, can you just say, just a few words about, what the Black Game Developer Fund is trying to do right now, and, how do you think some of the gaps that were mentioned by a lot of the people in terms of financing could be bridged, beyond the Black Game Developers Fund, since you have a lot of experience on the, on the continent. Can you comment on that aspect? What's the kind of support that you guys can provide, and beyond that, what's the kind of support that's needed?
All right, so the Black Game Developer Fund is, it's fairly new. I mean, it is a new initiative by Humble Games, kind of as a response to a lot of the racial injustices that we were seeing all over the world at the beginning of the year, which, I mean, a lot of it started from the United States, the killing of George Floyd, although things were happening before that. But I think like the Black Lives Matter movement peaked a lot, and Humble Bundle or Humble Games generally, one of their missions is being a force for good, like in the industry. So to work on racial equity, to work on improving racial equity, they developed, well, for the first time, they offered the $1 million fund that is specifically targeted at Black developers worldwide. So anyone who has African heritage or presents as African, whether Afro-Caribbean, African living in the diaspora, whether it's Europe, Australia, Japan, wherever, Black, yeah. If so, it's open to people from all over the world, and the fact that and I appreciated the fact that they brought me on as an advisor, because it gives me an opportunity to not only nudge more people on the continent towards applying for the Black Game Developer Fund, but also to advocate for games within games that do get approved within the system, that have the challenges that I'm familiar with, that might not be familiar to Western publishers at all. Because the process of publishing a game, and like based on everything we've talked about, you can already imagine that the process of publishing a game or getting a game to the publishing point, even just that, is different depending on which part of the world you're from and what your opportunities and resources available to you are. So at the moment, you can watch, the Humble is about to announce some of the games that have been selected for the fund, and it is a combination of games from around the world, of games from Black developers around the world. America, Europe, Africa. So have a look at that. I think that's something that people should watch out for. And there is still a lot of developments happening. I've only been on actively advising for, I believe, 3 months.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's a short period of time, but I've seen a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of stuff, a lot of promising stuff, but also I've seen a lot of places where it's like, okay, definitely we're learning that work needs to be done here and here and here. Yeah, and personally, like outside of that, personally, I'm enjoying getting an insight into working with Western publishers and seeing like what the gaps, because we kind of don't really have publishers on the continent. So yeah, I think like seeing ways in which games on the continent can be funded. The Black Game Developer Fund is one of them, one of the very few ways that you can fund games on the continent. Yeah. But I hope more people do initiatives like this.
Definitely. Guys, unfortunately, time is running against us, so we'll have to wrap it up. But it was a great conversation. I loved it. I think we started by we gave ladies the first word. So I think, I mean, except Nick's introduction. So let me finish by giving him this end and letting him close and just tell us just one more word to close on this panel.
Look, I mean, I think the ultimate conclusion is that I think the future is bright. I think the goals that we've kind of set for ourselves are definitely achievable. And like you can already kind of see it in things like Nyamakop and sort of the things that they're doing, the success that we have in our like in Renderheads and 24-bit games in terms of the services studios. It's achievable. It's definitely achievable. We've got a really good foundation to kind of build off, and it's just going to be, the question is going to come down to if we can capitalize on it. And given the quality of the people that we've got in sort of thought leadership positions, both in South Africa but just generally on the continent, I think it's eminently possible. And like I really do think we'll see a massive takeoff of the games industry in sub-Saharan Africa within the next 10 years.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I take the opportunity to say thanks to the French Institute in South Africa who made this possible. Thanks to all of you who are listening in. We hope to continue the discussions on the development of video games in Africa, both during Africa Games Week and during FEJA as well. So thanks again for being with us. We appreciated it. Take care and have a great night.
Thank you all so much for having us.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.